funky. I mean, how could something move so fast like that?
Given how often those who detail personal UFO events are subject to ridicule, especially if they're credentialed airmen, some who were present during the Nimitz encounter have refused to come forward, but many have. What you're about to see has been detailed and corroborated by military personnel, sailors, Navy aviators, former commanding officer David Fravor, former senior chief petty officer Kevin Day, operations specialists Trevor, who will not disclose his last name, and former lieutenant commander Jim Clean Slate.
I was sitting back there and I noticed these tracks on the scope.
November 10th, 2004, 2 weeks before the event, the USS Princeton noticed 8 to 10 unknown objects with the advanced AN Spy-1B passive radar.
I didn't really think much about them at first. There were 8 to 10 of them at the time.
Systems specialist Trevor was the first to notify the captain of the unknowns.
It would be stationary, and then boom, it would move.
The objects showed up at 28,000 feet, moving slow.
And they started tracking south, and the strange thing about them is they were 28,000 feet going 100 knots, which is really, really strange.
They also moved erratically and randomly.
If it's aircraft, it would be moving like a solid movement across the string, whereas here it's like jumping around.
It kind of resembled, if you can imagine, watching snowflakes fall from the sky.
To ensure the radar wasn't defective, Officer Kevin Day contacted other ships asking if they were seeing the same thing.
And sure enough, everyone else was seeing them too at that time.
The radar team and captain continued to be the only ones who knew about these objects on both the USS Princeton and the USS Nimitz, numbering just over 20 witnesses so far.
And meanwhile, my entire team on Princeton is trying to figure this thing out. And believe me, we were going through our checklist, trying to figure out what these things are, because that's our job.
As night fell, they disappeared, but showed up again the following morning. This went on sporadically. For several days, the objects disappeared and reappeared in excess of 100 times. Then, on November 14th, a scheduled routine training exercise was about to begin.
It went left, and then it banged straight up. I mean, it was insane.
This thing falls straight out of the sky in less than a second.
Former commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, David Fravor, and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, along with the rest of the crew, were still unaware of the objects, both of whom accompanied by a weapons systems officer sitting behind them.
We're going to climb up to 20,000 feet. We're going to go to our point about 40 miles south, and we're going to hold, wait for the other airplane.
Up until then, Petty Officer Kevin Day's experience of the unknowns had certainly been unusual. However, it was on this day he began to get worried.
Now, I wasn't really concerned about him until the morning of the 14th when we had an air defense exercise.
Officer Day pulls his captain and air defense commander aside, telling him that he doesn't think the objects are hostile, but his concern, however, is safety of flight.
Because we're getting ready to put a bunch of aircraft in the air, and I highly recommend that we go out and investigate one of these things and see what they are. He immediately concurred.
After reporting this to his captain, Princeton Radar instructed the pilots to change course and investigate the radar spot.
We took control of the flight.
They said, hey, we're going to cancel the air defense exercise.
Above them, an E-2 Hawkeye from the Wallbanger Squadron is directing the aircraft. The weather is clear, with zero cloud cover. Princeton Radar asked if they currently had ammunition.
Fast Eagle 110, say loadout.
And again, there was a stunned silence because that was a very strange question to hear.
They are now very close to the target, finding themselves in a merged plot visual arena, meaning they should no longer have to use radar to locate what they're looking for.
The contact that we're trying to see and us are inside the resolution cell of the radar, which means they can't discern the two of us.
It's at this point, Fravor sees something.
And all of a sudden on the radio, we have it in the overhead speaker. All of a sudden I hear, oh my God, I'm engaged.
You guys see this? What is that?
He observes a turbulent oval area of churning water with foam and frothy waves.
And I see something in the water, and it looks like about the size of a 737 in the water, pointing east.
100, Baker here, Angels 2-4.
aircraft in the water at the merge plot, just north of our position, about 2 miles. Charlie, roger. I'm descending to Angels 14 to take a look.
This object fell straight out of the sky from 28,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean. What I found out later was 0.78 seconds.
In order for an object to do that, it would need to be traveling 48,000 miles an hour.
Oh, well above supersonic. It like a bullet out of a gun, it took off.
This thing did whatever it did without creating a sonic boom.
On the right-hand side of the airplane, just forward of the wing line, is this little white, which looks like a tic-tac, which is why we call it the tic-tac. And it's moving around erratically, so it's doing this. You know, it's moving just randomly around.
Fravor pursues the object.
It kind of recognizes that we're there and it starts to mirror us. So now, think of it at the 6 o'clock position, we're at the 12 o'clock position, we're coming down and it starts coming up.
Commander Fravor is now less than a mile away. He continues.
I go, well, the only way I'm going to get this is to do an aggressive out-of-plane maneuver. He's over here, and I go like this.
He jumped 1,000 meters.
It literally is 1 minute it's there, and the next minute it's like poof, and it's gone. We do a 180 and go back to the location we're at, and there's nothing in the water.
Strike Group Air Defense has arbitrary points in the sky called caps that are told to the crew so everyone knows where that point is.
This object suddenly disappeared off the scope.
We start going back to the cap, and the Princeton controller calls us up and he says,
Of course, everyone is now listening to this intercept.
says, hey, I'll never forget it. He goes, sir, you're not going to believe this.
Sir, you're not going to believe this.
I said, what? He says, that thing is at your cap. It's hanging out right where you're supposed to be.
The unknown is at your cap station.
Once Fravor came back, several pilots began leaving on their own to intercept the objects.
And all of a sudden, the next thing we know, we've got all these other pilots doing autonomous intercepts on their own. And as soon as the pilots went back up to their assigned altitudes, the objects popped all back into the sky to 28,000 feet and kept going 100 knots as if nothing exciting had happened.
Both Commander Fravor and Operations Specialist Trevor admit to seeing much clearer videos while on board the Princeton, uploaded to the CipherNet.
So only certain people have access to that internet. So it's a highly secure net.
Trevor was the first person to notify the captain of the objects. The officers later invited him to watch the video to see if it matched what he was observing on radar.
This object, if you're looking at the screen, it went left and then it banked straight up.
When you look at the high-res video, that good luck finding it, but the original video...
And then it just, boom, it goes up, and I remember the officer saying, there's nothing on this planet that can do that. It's not possible.
When he goes into TV mode, he's pretty zoomed in. You can see there's two little things that stick out of the bottom of it.
I don't think they'll ever release it. And I think footage that they do release and will release, they're going to make it fuzzy. They're not going to make it clear for you guys, and they're going to cut it up. You know they know what they're doing, man. Isn't it kind of obvious?
I make UFO videos to hopefully bring a fresh perspective, to expose parts of the skeptical analysis as ideological and lazy, to transcend the political, and to reinvigorate our outlook as we continue to try and understand our place in the world. I don't focus so much on UFOs because I want to believe, but because these things happen, and I think it's fascinating. So open your eyes, because one day, it might happen to you.